All right, well, we'll wait for that glue to dry a little bit. We're going to go back to our motor discussion. So here we have our motor. We talked about the screws already in the last video clip there. So I have my four shorter screws. I'm just going to grab two of those. Must have brushed the other one somewhere else. That's okay. Okay, we'll get set those, put the rest of them in our little bag to save for later. Then we're going to pull out our little motor shaft extension piece here. Okay, you can use this little spinner thing if you want to. I also have some nylon lock nuts you can use for the motor, so I'll use one of those. Just they're a little bit more secure to keep on the motor. Won't worry about that yet till we put the prop on though. So this may be a new thing for some of you. We're going to use some Loctite on our motor assembly here. These little silver screws, move those a little bit more over here and zoom in a little bit more. There we go. These little silver screws here have to do with, let's see, trying to turn so it looks semi-normal. Little silver screws here, those ones are going to attach this motor shaft onto the motor. Okay, and then the black screws are used for attaching the motor onto the motor mount. All right, so we don't want this to ever come off, really, unless we want to take it off. So we're going to use something called Loctite. If you've never seen this before, it'll be new. It's sometimes called thread locker. Loctite's actually a brand name, kind of like Kleenex. And you call all tissues Kleenex, and everyone calls this stuff Loctite, even though the generic name would be thread locker. It's an adhesive type for screws, but it is an anaerobic adhesive, so it just gets dry and hard when there's no oxygen, or no air, I guess I should say. So don't like dump this stuff all over the place because it's not just going to dry like glue. What you do is put some onto these little screws before we thread them into here, and that way they'll keep this piece on the motor. Okay, these little tiny silver screws actually have a little teeny Phillips head. So I'm going to grab my screwdriver set. You should have these around the classroom. Get a little teeny Phillips screwdriver out. The black screws are metric, so we'll use two different bits for this kind of assembly portion here. But I got a little teeny Phillips screwdriver head, and that should be about the right size. Yep, that looks pretty good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make sure I got this lined up onto the four holes there. You can see those 1, 2, 3, 4, and place this on. What I like to do, not everyone does it this way. I like to put a couple screws in at least beforehand, and that way I have things lined up. Nothing's going to move around on me while I'm trying to do the Loctite later on. Okay, I really just need a one screw in this case because it's going to self-align with that center shaft anyways. I'm going to go ahead and put two of them in here. Say, okay, that looks like it's fitting pretty good. Nice and snug. So that's good. Okay. And so I'll just remember to take those two and put Loctite on them after I put these two in with Loctite, if that makes sense. So Loctite, I have bottles of it like this around the classroom. There's also like a glue stick type form of it as well. It's more like a paste, but the principle is pretty much the same. Try to get the screw. I often hold it like this with my finger. Take the Loctite, okay, and just kind of get a little dab of it on the end of the screw. Don't cover the screw. That's more than enough right there. Let's zoom in a little bit more. See if it'll focus on that. Max zoom reached. Okay, but you can see the end of the screw is kind of bluish right there. Just a little drop. We don't need a ton of Loctite or anything, okay? Just a little bit. And then you can wipe off some excess with your finger. It's not going to hurt you. And we'll take the screw and we'll put it right into the spot where it's supposed to go on the motor mount. And we'll screw it all the way in. Nice and snug. Okay. And you can snug it down just hand tight. Okay. Don't need to strip the threads out or anything. We'll do another one. Okay, I'm remembering here which screws have Loctite and which don't, so we don't forget. If you have to take a screw out that has Loctite, you should be able to take it out just fine. But then you got to put kind of redo the Loctite on that screw. So might as well just do it once if we can. Screw this one in here. And now that those two are both in, I'm going to take both of these out just because that way I don't have to keep remembering which one's which. And we'll Loctite these two. And then we'll be done with this process of gluing this prop adapter onto the motor. Not gluing it on, putting it on, sorry. And that's good because that means our motor will be basically all the way ready for installation into the plane at this point. One more. It's always a good idea, in my opinion, to use Loctite on fasteners, like screws and things like that, that don't have any locking mechanism, especially with drone stuff, because there's lots of vibrations going on. However, you should not use Loctite on things that are made out of plastic. Loctite will dissolve some plastic, so we don't put any Loctite on, for example, this, when we put our prop on. Okay, for a number of reasons, but because we don't want to get Loctite on the prop, it'll dissolve the prop and make it fall apart. Okay, but also we have to be careful on some other pieces here. So here's our motor mount now. Now that we have this installed, we can mount the motor onto this blue thing. Okay, and the way the motor mount's designed to be used here is in order for basically the motor to mount on here, we're going to put some screws through the back side here, and that way the motor will stay attached. We can then glue this entire assembly into the plane when we're ready to do that. So I'm going to take those two screws of the shorter type from earlier. Let's see, I don't need this one. That one's a longer one. So I'm going to compare. We should have 4 short ones and 2 longer ones. We're going to use 2 of the shorter ones for this. So in this case, we're going to have to go through the plastic of the mount with the screw. So it'd be ideal to not get Loctite on the plastic if we can help it. To change my screwdriver bit here. Okay. Take this, we can kind of thread it through the plastic a little bit like that. The other one do the same thing. Odds are it'll be top and bottom for you. I do have holes in the side as well, but the idea is when we line this up with the motor, on the back of the motor there are 4 holes, but there's 2 that are closer together and 2 that are further apart. Okay, and so these holes on here are spaced for the holes that are further apart. So you're not meant to screw all 4 of these screws, you're only meant to screw in 2. We just have 4 holes just in case, if you have to align the motor differently. But what should happen, I think, on all these motors, they look like they're made all the same, is we'll use the holes that are farther apart, which will lead to the wires coming out this side. Okay, so it'll kind of mount up just like so, with the wires kind of coming out to this one side once you screw it on. Okay, again, I'm going to kind of use my technique here. I'm going to screw the motor on without Loctite first, then I'll remove a screw one at a time and do the Loctite. That just helps keep everything aligned. Okay. Oops. And we try to attach it here. Try to get it kind of lined up a little bit there. And we'll get a dry fit, and then we'll go from there. So let's get this one attached. There we go. I haven't tightened them all the way down yet, but you can see the motor's attached with those 2 screws. Okay, it's not tight, but it's attached. And the motor wires will kind of come out to this one side, which will route on the plane when we get to that point. So what I can do now is I can take one of these screws and kind of cinch it down a little bit more. Take the other screw out. Okay. Well, actually not all the way out. We're just going to move it just enough. Okay. Get this bottom screw a little bit loose so we can kind of spin the motor over. That makes sense. So it's now just pivoting on one screw. I can push this screw through the plastic so it's sticking out. You see it sticking out my finger there. I can apply a little bit of Loctite here to the end of the screw. Oops, sorry, let's do that so you can see it. A little bit of Loctite to the end of the screw. Okay, trying to avoid getting on the 3D printed plastic if we can. Not the end of the world, these planes aren't going to last forever anyways, but try to avoid that, and then we can kind of pivot the motor back up and get that screw aligned with its hole where it's supposed to be at. We'll screw it in, okay? Not all the way, because we're going to do the same thing with the bottom screw. So we'll kind of pivot the bottom one out of the way. Okay. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I think I keep going out of frame here. Sorry about that. I'm going to place some Loctite on here. Just a little bit there. Pivot the motor back into its position there. And then we're going to kind of fully insert the screw. Whoops. Fully insert the screw into the motor. And try to line that up there. Sorry, my hat's getting in the camera as I'm trying to look too close here. There we go. And now we can cinch both screws down, try to go a little bit at a time on both of them, and then do that kind of final tightening. There we go. Just nice and snug. And now our motor's attached. That's good. Our screws in the back there. Motor should be able to spin freely by hand, shouldn't be binding up on anything or any other problems. Our motor's basically ready for install now. Let's zoom back out here. Okay, let's get back to our plane and test that. for the moment. We'll move our motor pieces here off to the side. You do get some extra screws with your motor, so keep track of those. They are helpful for later stuff as well, in case you lose one. And let's see how our elevator servo is doing here. Let's kind of check its behavior. There we go. Oops. Looks pretty good. Let's flip it over. Shouldn't be rubbing on anything. No, it's pretty good. And the neutral point looks pretty good. I got a little bit down. You guys probably can't see that very well from the camera, but looks like it's pretty good there. So that's awesome. And we'll get our other servos just plugged into some other ports real quick. I'll talk about this more specifically later. I just want to move all of them at the same time now, just for kind of for fun. And there we go. So now if we have all three of those hooked up, whoops, I plugged them in the wrong spots here. Oh, I did. Duke did it the wrong way. Sorry, guys. There we go. The rudder. What's wrong with my servo over here? What's going on with that one? I wonder. Oh, I plugged it into the throttle channel. Well, that would explain it. Let's move this over real quick to the right channel and then put that in the other channel. Don't worry about this, guys. Just Duke messed up here for a second. We'll get it. There we go. That's more like it. Okay, let it focus again. There we go. See if you can see all the surfaces moving around. That's a happy sound. Little plane wants to fly. There we go. Okay, good. So our servos look to all be in good order there. Okay. So now let me move this out of the way. We have the opportunity to put our motor in. Okay, so our motor here is going to go into the back of the plane. Okay. And this little mount's meant to sit right down in here, so in the back of the plane here. Now at this point you can get your prop out. You don't need to attach it all the way yet, but just slide it onto the motor. Okay, nice and flush. You can see where the prop is going to be when it's spinning. Right, we want it to be basically centered inside this open area. Okay, so if you kind of look at it here, we say, okay, let's scoot it a little bit back. It looks pretty centered to me. We can give it a little. If we pick the plane up and give it a little spin, it's not hitting anything. That's good. So we can mark that with a pen or something if you want and adjust it so. But it'd be right around where the edge of the foam back here is. I don't know, about between the cylindrical part and the conical part of the motor. If that makes sense. Let me zoom in on that so you can't see anything I'm talking about right now. So you'll be lining up the back of the foam here, right around where this cylindrical part of the motor meets the conical top part of the motor. If you're looking down, okay, you can kind of see that's pretty well aligned there, and that's about where the motor can sit for good clearance and everything with the prop on it. So hopefully that makes sense. What we'll do is we're going to go ahead and, since this motor mount is a PLA motor mount, it will get kind of soft and stuff when we put the hot glue on it. We're just going to do some glue around 1, 2, 3 edges. And if we have that area marked with a pen or something like that, we can stick it down right in that area. What we want to do before we glue it in, though, is we want to make a little cutout on this side for our motor wires to go through. So I'm just going to take a little blade here, and if I put my motor back in there where it was, okay, about right there, okay, you can see I need to cut how far I need to cut down and over. And so what we're going to do is just going to slice out a little piece of foam there, so those wires can go kind of straight down, as opposed to having to go out and then down, which makes them more likely to get caught in the prop. Okay, so we can just go ahead and look at that. I'm just going to use a screwdriver to kind of make a little dent in the foam right there. Okay, and that looks pretty good. A little dent in the foam for my marker. I'm going to take my razor blade and I'm just going to go ahead and slice kind of towards the back, so you can see my blade there is going towards this way. Just cut it out. Okay, and then we can cut it over. Make that a little bit deeper actually, or a little bit farther. Okay, then we can kind of cut this over towards the wall of the foam and try to cut through that as well as you can. I do have little X-Acto knives in the classroom as well. You can use something like that to kind of get down in there a little bit better. And cut through this section here where the foam's at, or where the glue's at. And once you have it mostly free, run your blade along the glue there a little bit to get that free from the glue. So I'm kind of going along the side like that. And we're going to kind of slice, trying to slice the back of your plane or something when the blade jerks there, but we're trying to slice this out a little bit. Then we can grab a pair of pliers or something to help us grab it and just pull that section out. Looks like some of the paper from the foam is left on mine. I'm just going to pull that little tab off. There we go. And now when we put our motor down in there, at about that location, we can get our motor wires that can go right down through that little cubby there and be nice and flat so they don't stick out and get in the prop. Okay, so once that's done, now we can begin to glue the motor mount in. So let's double check our measurement. I'm going to scooch up a little bit right there. That looks good. Okay, and that should clear the prop as well. Double check the prop clearance. We'll put our, oops, sorry, I forgot to zoom back out. We'll double check our prop clearance here. So we'll put our prop back on. Make sure it's going to clear the airframe and everything, not going to hit the pod or the back of the opening there. So about right there looks good to me. And I think we'll be in business. Okay. So I'm going to put some glue on the motor mount now. Take the prop off, make it a little bit easier. Some glue on the motor mount, and then we'll put it in place. Again, this hot glue is hot enough, it'll make the plastic kind of soft, so don't keep the heat on it for a long, long time, if that makes sense. Just enough to get it into the plane and try not to burn yourself. Okay, so I'm going to kind of spread these a little bit and fiddle that down into the opening there. Okay, and then we're going to slide it up to where we need to be at for the prop to clear, so about right there. I'm going to push it down. I want to make sure it's down flat so it's not twisted or something like that. Don't push too hard where you bend the plastic, but nice and firm, and then kind of squeeze the sides too. So we get a nice, good bond there. I'm going to push on the bottom a little bit maybe so we make sure it's nice and flat again. And we can take a scrap piece of foam and get some of this excess stuff that's squished off when I slid it down into the cavity there. Oops, got a spider web of glue. Don't want to get any glue on the motor. I mean, you can peel it off, but it's just kind of a pain. So try to get that extra glue off and not on the motor. There's our little motor mount. I'll squeeze the sides here to get some good adhesion there as well. Okay. And if all goes well, that motor mount should hold up really well, perhaps even in a crash. I don't know, it might break in a crash, but easy enough to print a new one. Just takes a couple minutes on the 3D printer. And I have all the files for these parts that I can share with you if you'd like to print your own out of a different material or a stronger material or a different color or whatever. So that's just fine. Let's take a look. We've got it aligned pretty well. We try not to get the motor like tilted either, if that makes sense. So the motor mount should help it keep it nice and straight. That looks like it did a pretty good job. If I thread these in here where they're going to end up going, kind of start to see how that will work. So the motor wires are nice and tucked out of the way. Motor's right there. Throw our prop on. Boom. Okay. There we have it. Looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. All right. Okay. So we have our motor glued on. At this point, zoom all the way back out. At this point, you're basically done putting all the physical moving parts onto your plane. The rest of it is kind of cable management and placing things into the plane. If you want to Velcro some pieces in here or something like that, you can do that to keep things from moving around. I'm going to unplug my receiver for a minute And then we'll come back in the next video and I will show you guys how I'm going to do it on my plane. You don't have to do it that way. I'm going to show you where I put the different components and things like that.